Serious, what is the most supernatural or unexplainable thing that has happened to you? When I was little, I used to stay over at my grandmother's all the time. She would make me a pallet out of blankets on her living room floor, and she would always sit with me and rub my back until I fell asleep. Once, when I was 5 or 6, I woke up in the living room alone. Now, this was an old and isolated farmhouse, cornfields and no other houses surrounded her, so it was very dark. I had a moment where I forgot where I was. I remember I was laying on my back, and I sort of half propped myself up with my arms, looking ahead of me toward her big TV cabinet, but I couldn't see much. I then rolled over onto my belly to look behind me, in a sort of propped up seal position. As soon as I turned over, I was looking straight at a little girl who was standing at the head of my pallet, looking down at me. She was a bit older looking than me, with dark, curly hair, and she was wearing an old-fashioned dress, but not one that went to the floor. It sort of stopped at her ankles. The weirdest thing was that I wasn't afraid of her. I was confused and a little timid, but mostly curious. She had a soft bluish-whitish glow around her. I wouldn't call it light because it didn't really shine out, more just encased her, for lack of a better word. She was just looking at me, and she also had a sort of curious look on her face. I don't know how long we stared at one another, not a very long time for sure, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I very slowly and softly reached out my hand to touch her. Before my hand could get close to her, she dissipated. She did not disappear. It was more like watching the water turn into a steam cloud, but this cloud was made of tiny little spheres the same shade of bluish white that encased her, and moving as a unit, the cloud of spheres moved to the window, floating, and went through the glass and out of my line of sight. Seeing that triggered my fear response, and I literally screamed, "Grandma." She rushed in quickly and tried comforting me by saying it was a dream. It absolutely was not a dream. I was too aware, and it couldn't be sleep paralysis because I moved too much. When I was several years older, Grandma confided in me that she knew the house to be haunted. She said she would see a tall shadow pacing the hall, the doors would rattle/shake when nobody was home but her. Alone in the house, she'd hear footsteps and voices in my grandpa's old study, and a little dark-haired girl would run by the windows in her living room. Creepy stuff, man. I have experienced a lot of unexplainable things, but the most by far happened a few years ago. I was sitting on my couch knitting and behind me were a desk and desk chair. I feel and hear someone running behind me. I turned quickly, thinking it was my kid, but nothing was there, and the desk chair was slightly spinning. I kind of had a huh moment and looked throughout the house, and everything was fine, and I pushed it out of my mind, and I continued to knit. Then from the corner of my eyes, I see this figure staring at me, peering from the side of my couch. I look, and I see it disappears. It was a little blonde boy with bright, almost glowing blue eyes, and greenish, blue/gray face, and a dark purple smile. I was on a camping trip with my school. At night, we put on a campfire, and we were all having fun. Suddenly, we heard someone screaming for help. That person sounded like a classmate of ours. I think his name was Kaido. I am half Japanese, and at that time, I was in Japan. We came to the spot, we heard him scream, and then we again heard him saying, "I am here. Help me." We rushed there only to see a shed. Then, we saw him running to us, asking, "What are you all doing here?" I was so scared, and I heard you all screaming, so I came here to see if you all were okay or not. Our teacher fainted, and I was so fucking scared that my soul left my body for a second. I have a twin. Occasionally she and I will experience physical manifestations of each other's pain/injury. She once got in a car crash, and the airbag blew up in her face. We both woke the next morning with black eyes. I was not in the accident. I blew out my ankle, and she couldn't walk for 2 weeks. People think we're full of shit, but there is no explanation. It doesn't happen every time one of us gets hurt, but it's happened maybe half a dozen times in almost 40 years. When I was young, I thought I lived multiple lives. It's like my first memory was about an apartment building, me stuck in a box, doing Christmas, then dying in a fire. Then I'm transported into an elevator, and I live for 4 years until I'm 6, then my whole world flips upside down after me, and my mom walks out of a store, and boom, then I have my first memory of me witnessing my parents sitting on the couch holding my mom's pregnant stomach at 4 years old. Until I was 18, I almost convinced myself that I would lose all of my progress in this world and have to start again. It felt so real, and I still have those memories, and I don't know if that was just my subconscious being weird or if that was my universe rebooting multiple times before it landed on this one. I was staying on the Queen Mary for a wedding with my now husband. We got back after the wedding and lay down to go to bed. I fall asleep pretty fast, but my husband keeps tossing around and telling me to stop poking his back. I assume he is just messing with me. It goes on long enough that I eventually get fed up, and we both half sit up, and I'm in the middle of telling him how could that possibly have been me. When all of a sudden, the headboard slams into the wall. It was so fucking loud, like someone punched it into the wall. We felt it shake. We both scream and go quiet. Spent the next hour with the lights on, talking ourselves into how it had to be the people in the next room. Definitely wasn't because we heard them come back to their room an hour later and make love. Ha! Very thin walls. We finally get up the nerve to turn off the lights and try to sleep. We both notice one corner of the room just looks darker than the rest of the room. Nothing else happened, but when we checked out, we mentioned what happened to the front desk. The woman looked at our room number, smiled, and handed us a paper with all the haunted rooms and descriptions of what happened in each one. Our room was number 3 on the list. And the most common experiences were being poked or nudged, loud bangs, and dark shadows. I never really believed in ghosts, but that was wild. There's this light that hovers beyond the cornfield across from my house. It used to be rainbow, then it was pink for a while, and now it's rainbow again. I just see it every now and then, maybe once or twice a month. It usually hovers there all night, but I've seen it leave a couple times. It just flies away off to the west. I saw it a few days ago, actually. It was late one night, and I was walking over to the kitchen to get a midnight snack, when I see a dark brown cat tail peeking out from the wall. I was confused, as my last cat, who had a dark brown tail, had died 2 years ago. I thought it was one of my cats with orange tails, but when I entered the kitchen, neither of them was anywhere to be seen. I know this was not as scary as some of the stories on here, but it made me really miss her. R.I.P. Allie. Went to a children's cemetery a few years ago with a bunch of buddies. It was a cooler, clear fall night when we got there, and as we stood watching, we saw what looked like clouds walking between the headstones. No real defined shapes, but they looked like they were walking and roughly person-shaped. We, all 7 of us, heard a little girl giggling and what sounded like a rope creaking from weight being dropped on it. All of the clouds were around the big oak tree in the middle of it, and it looked like one was hanging off a branch. We noped out of there. On our way out, I saw 4 red glowing eyes in the back seat of my truck. Nothing in the truck was red or orange, and as I was driving, I could feel someone running their hands on my face. Fingers under my jaw back to my ears. My night got a lot weirder after that. I didn't sleep for 2 days following, and I still get nightmares from it. One of my cousins passed away due to a sudden cardiac arrest, so I decided to drive to his city to offer condolences to his family and be with them during the difficult time. It was a long drive from one end of the country I'm living in to another. Along the journey, in the early hours of the morning, I started to fall asleep behind the wheel. I fell into a vivid dreamlike state where I was still semi-conscious but barely. I had some strange dream of me having a car accident along the same road, and then I was looking at my destroyed vehicle from a third-person view, which was also on fire, and I was trapped inside of it. I felt a very strange sadness and goosebump feelings as I looked at the scene. Suddenly, I heard a loud panicked voice of a stranger wake up. It sounded like an older lady and had a sense of urgency to it. I literally got shook and woke up immediately. I noticed that I was speeding towards a red traffic light with about 2 or 3 cars parked behind it 100 yards out. The visibility had been very poor, the road was empty, and I didn't notice any cars in front of me before then. I don't know where they came from, as there were literally no adjacent side roads leading up to the light they could have slipped in from. I then parked on the first side road I saw after the light and rested for a few hours. I am not a religious or spiritual man, but my partner at the time was convinced that it was a guardian angel. In my early 20s, I took a personal day from my night shift job. I just needed a break and to get outside for a while. I drove about 15 miles from home to a church that is one of those stone labyrinth walking/contemplation circles. When I made it to the middle of the labyrinth, there was a tremendous snarling sound from the tree line about 150 feet away, which was followed by what sounded like a horse screaming in fear or pain. The horse sound stopped abruptly. There was a thud and then complete silence. I stood there frozen, not moving, thinking there must be a bear or a wolf or something, both unlikely, as this was in the suburbs of Chicago, listening as intently as I could. Nothing. A minute passed. More nothing. I start thinking, okay, must have been a spooked animal that ran off. Nothing to worry about. Come on, adrenaline, calm yourself down. I took one step to start back down the path out of the contemplation circle. Behind me, a crashing sound, breaking branches, Then thumping of heavy footfalls on the ground, coming straight towards me. Something huge and near impossible to describe other than dark and hairy covered the 150 feet between me and the tree line in just a couple seconds. Whatever it was barely brushed against the side of me, knocked me down and sent me rolling about 5 feet from where I was and raced around the side of the church. Just like that, it was over. No more sound. No footfalls. No animal screams. No breaking branches. Just me, alone and terrified in the dark. Once I recovered, I didn't bother walking the path out. I sprinted across the stone lines and broke for my car, got in, and drove off to a well-lit Walmart parking lot. I only realized after I parked that I never even took the time to turn my headlights on. Working at the school job, I got now the building empties at about 6, and for some reason, the second floor is wood floors abs you can hear anyone walking yet when I'm the only person in the building, I hear someone casually walking. Never actually saw anyone, just hearing it. Back in 2009, a thief tried to break into our home where we had newly transferred. My mom screamed when she saw the dark figure behind the iron gates, and the person disappeared into nothingness soon after. The thing is, she saw that same guy, a young man walking down the road in the afternoon, and he was floating a good 2 inches above the ground, barely even moving his legs and staring into the abyss of nothingness. We confided with our neighbors, who confirmed that all of them had seen that figure at some point or the other in their life, and that person would appear only once to each individual. Yes, this is a local phenomenon. We shifted to another place after living there for a year.